In the heart of London's luxurious Savoy Hotel, a powerful tyrant is found dead. The door is bolted from the inside. The police see a simple heart attack, but Hercule Poirot sees a perfect, impossible crime. Who was the serpent in the garden? Was it the beautiful, unhappy wife, secretly in love with another man? The glamorous actress with a bitter grudge, or the trusted family doctor whose calm demeanor hides a dark and patient hatred? When everyone has a secret and every clue is a lie, how do you find a killer who can vanish from a sealed room? In a crime this flawless, the most dangerous poison is the truth.
Chapter 1. An Imbalance of Souls. It is a curious thing, the nature of peace. We seek it, we extol its virtues, and yet, when we find ourselves in its uninterrupted presence, the human mind, or at least my own, begins to crave a little disruption, a ripple in the placid water. It was with such a sentiment that I found myself seated opposite my dear friend, Hercule Poirot, in the grand dining room of the Savoy Hotel on a crisp evening in late October. The air outside carried the damp chill of London's autumn, but within those storied walls, a gentle warmth enveloped a scene of impeccable civility. The low murmur of conversation, the discreet clinking of silver against porcelain, and the soft strains of a string quartet all conspired to create an atmosphere of perfect, almost tedious harmony. I was remarking as much to Poirot, who, for his part, seemed entirely content. He was meticulously arranging his dessert fork and spoon into a state of perfect geometric alignment with the edge of the table. "But is this not the pinnacle of civilization, Hastings?" he replied, his eyes twinkling with a satisfaction that was almost cat-like. "Order, precision, and a crème brûlée of the most exquisite quality. The mind can rest, the stomach can rejoice. What more can a man desire?" "A little excitement, perhaps," I ventured, leaning back in my chair and surveying the room. It was a veritable tableau of London's upper crust. Dowagers adorned with pearls, stern-faced gentlemen discussing finance, and bright young things whose laughter occasionally rose a fraction too high. It is all very pleasant, Poirot, but one cannot help but feel that nothing of consequence could ever happen here. Poirot placed his spoon down, the task of its alignment complete. He followed my gaze, but his observation was of a different quality altogether. Where I saw a general picture, he saw 1,000 minute details, each a story in itself. His eyes, bright and intelligent, scanned the room not as a passive observer, but as a geologist might scan a cliff face, searching for the one fissure, that one tiny crack that betrays a deeper structural flaw. "You are wrong, mon ami," he said softly, his voice barely audible above the music. "Things of consequence happen precisely in such places. The passions of the human heart, greed, jealousy, hatred, they do not announce themselves with the trumpet. No, they wear the evening dress, they sip the champagne, and they smile, but they are here all the same. Look." He gave a subtle nod of his famously egg-shaped head towards a table situated in a discreet alcove not far from our own. Seated there were 4 individuals, a party whose collective aura seemed to subtly disturb the placid atmosphere of the room. I had noticed them earlier, if only for the striking beauty of the younger woman. At the head of the table sat a man who could only be a titan of industry or a peer of the realm, or perhaps both. He was Lord Harrington, a name I knew from the papers, a magnate who had built an empire on steel and shipping. He was a man in his late 60s, with a face that looked as though it had been hewn from granite and left out in the weather. His hair was a shock of iron gray, His jaw was set in a permanent scowl, and his eyes, buried beneath thick brows, seemed to miss nothing and approve of less. He exuded an air of brutal authority, treating the waiter who refilled his wineglass with a curt dismissiveness that bordered on contempt. To his right sat a woman I presumed to be his wife, Lady Beatrice Harrington. She was, I estimated, a good 30 years his junior, a classic English rose of breathtaking beauty. Her gown was of a deep sapphire silk that shimmered in the candlelight, and a necklace of formidable diamonds glittered at her throat. Yet her beauty was marred by a profound melancholy. She held her head high, but her eyes were downcast, and a faint tight line around her mouth suggested a tension that the polite smiles she offered could not conceal. She ate little, and when her husband addressed her, in a low, guttural tone that did not carry, she would start, as if roused from a dream, and offer a quiet, monosyllabic reply. The third member of the party was a young man, impeccably dressed in a dinner jacket whose posture was a study of rigid deference. This was Alastair Finch, Lord Harrington's private secretary. He was handsome in a sharp, angular way, with dark, intelligent eyes that darted about, constantly assessing the situation. He spoke only when spoken to, his replies to Lord Harrington's gruff questions precise and efficient. He seemed to exist in a state of perpetual vigilance, a man walking a tightrope, and I noted the way his knuckles were white as he gripped the stem of his wine-glass. Completing the quartet was a quiet, unassuming man in his 50s, with thinning hair and spectacles. He watched Lord Harrington with an air of professional concern, occasionally leaning in to murmur something about the richness of the sauce or the wisdom of a second glass of port. This, I surmised, must be the family physician, Dr. Arbuthnot, whose presence at a dinner party suggested Lord Harrington's health was a matter of constant and pressing concern. "A happy family," I murmured sarcastically. "Ah, but you see only the surface, Hastings. You see a gruff old man, a sad young wife, a nervous secretary, and a dutiful doctor. I see an imbalance, a discordance. The whole arrangement, it is not natural. The old man, he possesses the wealth and the power, yes, but he is a dying star, collapsing inward. The heat he gives off is not of life, but of rage against the dying of the light." As if to illustrate Poirot's point, a small drama unfolded. Lord Harrington summoned the sommelier with an imperious snap of his fingers. He proceeded to berate the man in a low but furious monologue about the temperature of the claret, his voice a venomous rasp. The sommelier, a man of immense professional dignity, stood pale and silent, absorbing the tirade without a word, before bowing and retreating with the offending bottle. Lady Beatrice flinched at her husband's tone, a faint blush of shame creeping up her neck. Alastair Finch, the secretary, stared intently at his plate, his jaw tight, while Dr. Arbuthnot made a feeble attempt at placation. Now, Alfred, the excitement is not good for your pressure," the doctor murmured. "To hell with my pressure," he snarled, though he kept his voice low. "I pay for excellence, and I expect to receive it. Is that too much to ask?" His gaze swept the room in a glare of general fury, and happened to fall upon a woman who was just then passing their table. She was, in a word, sensational. Tall, elegant, with hair the color of spun gold and a gown of emerald green that clung to her figure. Her movements had the fluid grace of a born performer, and I recognized her instantly. Miss Eleanor Vance, the American actress whose latest play had taken the West End by storm. She did not seem to notice the Harrington party at first, but as she drew level with their table, her eyes met Lord Harrington's. The exchange lasted no more than a second, but it was charged with an electric current that seemed to crackle in the air. Her step faltered, almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, Fear, recognition, contempt crossed her face before being replaced by a mask of cool indifference. Lord Harrington, for his part, stiffened, his already florid face darkening to a shade of plum. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible, shake of his head. Miss Vance continued on her way without a word, a faint, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. The incident was over in a moment, so swift and subtle that I was certain I was the only other person in the room to have truly registered it. But of course, I was wrong. "You see, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice a soft purr, "the serpent has entered the garden, and the apple has been offered." "What on earth do you mean, Poirot?" I asked, bewildered. They merely looked at each other. Au contraire, they spoke a volume, a history and a future in a single glance. Observe the reactions. Lord Harrington is a man of control, yet for a moment he lost it. Lady Beatrice saw the exchange, and if you look closely, you will see that the hand in her lap is now clenched into a fist. Mr. Finch, the secretary, he also saw it, and his mask of efficiency slipped. For a second, he looked not at Lord Harrington, but at Lady Beatrice, with an expression of, what was it, pity? Or perhaps something more complex. And the good doctor, he is now fussing over his patient with renewed urgency, trying to distract him, to lower the temperature. A simple glance, you say? No, it was a
Chapter 2. A Very Public Silence. I awoke the next morning to a London shrouded in a thick, pearly fog. It pressed against the windows of my room at the Savoy, muffling the sounds of the city and lending the world a ghostly, indistinct quality. The mood seemed to have seeped indoors. The usual morning bustle of the hotel felt subdued, the voices of guests and staff alike carrying a hushed, almost reverent tone. I put it down to the weather and thought little more of it as I made my way to the dining room to meet Poirot for breakfast. He was already seated at our table, a copy of the Times held before him, though I noted he was not reading it. His eyes were fixed over the top of the paper, observing the room with that peculiar, bird-like intensity of his. His coffee cup was precisely positioned on its saucer, his brioche remained untouched. On his face was an expression of profound concentration, as if he were listening to a piece of music too subtle for any ear but his own. "Good morning, Poirot," I said, taking my seat. "Dreary day." He lowered the newspaper slowly, folding it with an exactitude that was almost ceremonial. "The weather is merely a mirror, Hastings. It reflects the mood, and the mood in this hotel this morning is heavy. There is a tension, a disquiet. Can you not feel it?" I confess, I could not. I felt only the damp and a desire for a strong coffee and a plate of kippers. "I imagine it's just the fog, plays tricks on the nerves." "No, it is more than fog," he insisted, tapping a manicured finger on the table. "It is the silence, a very particular, very public silence. The kind that follows a loud noise, or a scream." Before I could question him further, our breakfast was interrupted. A man in a well-tailored but slightly rumpled suit approached our table, his face a mask of harried professionalism. He was the hotel manager, a Mr. Devereux, whose usual placid demeanor was noticeably frayed. He wrung his hands, a gesture of anxiety that he seemed unable to suppress. "Monsieur Poirot," he began, his voice low and urgent, "forgive me for the intrusion. I am Henry Devereux, the manager. I wonder if you might spare a moment of your valuable time?" Poirot inclined his head graciously. "But of course, Monsieur Devereux. Please, sit. You appear troubled." Devereux cast a nervous glance around the dining room before pulling up a chair. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is a most delicate and dreadful situation, monsieur. A tragedy. One of our guests, Lord Harrington—"
My heart gave a sudden, uncomfortable lurch. I thought instantly of the scene from the previous evening, the granite-faced tyrant, the sad wife, the tense secretary. "Lord Harrington?" Poirot prompted, his voice calm and steady, a rock in the manager's sea of agitation. "What has befallen him?" "He's dead, Monsieur Poirot." The words hung in the air between us, stark and ugly. "Dead?" I echoed, aghast. "But we saw him only last night. He was... well, he was in a dreadful temper, but he seemed solid enough." "Indeed?" Devereux wrung his hands again. "The doctor is with him now. He says it appears to be a heart seizure, a massive coronary. Given Lord Harrington's known medical history, it is not, perhaps, entirely unexpected. But the circumstances, monsieur, they are irregular." Poirot's eyes sharpened. The air of the thoughtful observer vanished, replaced by the keen, focused energy of the hunter. "Irregular? In what manner?" "The door to his suite was locked from the inside, bolted, in fact. Dr. Arbuthnot had to have the staff force it open. He had been trying to rouse his lordship for his morning medication and received no reply." "A locked room," Poirot murmured, his gaze distant. He straightened a salt cellar that was a millimeter out of place. "And inside?" "Lord Harrington was in his bed. The bedclothes were undisturbed. He looked for all the world as if he had simply passed away in his sleep. There were no signs of a struggle, no violence, nothing to suggest anything other than natural causes. And yet—" Devereux hesitated, swallowing hard. "And yet, you have come to Hercule Poirot," my friend finished for him, "which suggests that you, Monsieur Devereux, are not entirely satisfied with the explanation of natural causes." The manager's shoulders sagged with a relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "I am not, monsieur. It is the atmosphere. The family. Lady Beatrice is in a state of shock, of course, poor woman, but the secretary, Mr. Finch, he is almost unnaturally calm. And there is something else, something that the police, should I call them, might consider trivial, but it struck me as odd." "And what is that?" On the bedside table, next to Lord Harrington's glass of water, was a small white feather, a swan's down feather like one might find from a pillow. But the pillows in the suite are of the finest Hungarian goose down. We have no swan's down pillows in the hotel. I must admit, I almost scoffed. A feather? It seemed a ludicrously small detail in the face of death. But Poirot's reaction was entirely different. His eyes lit up with a green fire, and he leaned forward, his entire being radiating an intense, vibrant curiosity. "A white feather," he breathed, as if the words themselves held a world of significance. "C'est intéressant, très intéressant." He looked at Devereux, his decision made. "You were right to come to me, monsieur. I will, of course, look into this matter. Take me to the suite." The Harrington suite was on the 4th floor, overlooking the Thames. The fog had thinned slightly, and the gray, sluggish water was visible below. A uniformed constable stood guard outside the door, looking rather overwhelmed. Devereux spoke to him in a low voice, and we were admitted. The sitting room of the suite was furnished with an impersonal luxury that spoke only of expense. On a sofa, wrapped in a traveling rug, sat Lady Beatrice. She was as pale as marble, her beautiful face a mask of stunned disbelief. She stared blankly at the wall opposite, her hands clenched in her lap. Alastair Finch, the secretary, stood by the window, his back to the room, a rigid silhouette against the gray light. He turned as we entered, his face composed, his eyes watchful. In an armchair sat Dr. Arbuthnot, his medical bag open on the floor beside him. He was a man transformed from the previous evening. The fussy, slightly obsequious physician was gone, replaced by a figure of quiet authority. He looked exhausted, his face etched with lines of strain. He rose as we entered. "Monsieur Poirot, I know Mr. Devereux informed him he was fetching you. I'm not sure what you expect to find. It's a clear-cut case. Alfred's heart simply gave out. I've been warning him for years." Poirot bestowed a small, sympathetic bow. "My condolences on the loss of your patient, doctor, and yours, Lady Beatrice, on the loss of your husband." Beatrice Harrington gave no sign that she had heard him. Her gaze remained fixed, her sorrow a private, impenetrable fortress. "I will not disturb you for long," Poirot continued, his voice gentle. "I wish to only satisfy my own mind. With your permission, doctor, I will see the body." Dr. Arbuthnot hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded curtly, and led the way into the adjoining bedroom. The room was large and opulent, dominated by a heavy, dark wood bed. And in that bed lay the mortal remains of Lord Harrington. He was on his back, the sheet pulled up to his chest. His formidable face, so full of color and life the night before, was now a waxen, empty thing. The scowl had been smoothed away by the impartial hand of death, leaving behind a strange, almost pitiable vulnerability. His eyes were closed, and his hands rested on the coverlet. It was, as Devereux had described, a scene of absolute peace. Poirot stood at the foot of the bed, his head on one side, taking in every detail. His eyes moved slowly, methodically, around the room. They rested on the bedside table, where a glass of water stood next to a silver box for pills. And beside the glass, almost invisible against the white marble of the tabletop, lay the feather. It was small, delicate, and immaculately white. Poirot did not touch it. He merely looked at it for a long moment before turning his attention back to the man in the bed. He moved to the side of the bed and, with infinite care, leaned closer to Lord Harrington's face. He peered at his lips, his nostrils. His gaze was so intense that I found myself holding my breath. "What is it?" the doctor asked, a note of impatience in his voice. Poirot straightened up. "You say his heart failed, doctor. Is there anything that might have induced such a failure? A shock, perhaps? A sudden fright?" "Unlikely. The man was in his own bed, sound asleep. The bolt on the door—"
Chapter 3. The Order of Things. The official police presence, when it arrived, was personified by one Chief Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard, a familiar face, and one I was always pleased to see, though his arrival invariably signaled a turn towards the grim. Japp was a man of practicality, a solid, square-shouldered Englishman who trusted fingerprints and timetables far more than he trusted the delicate psychology of the human soul. He and Poirot held a mutual, if occasionally grudging, respect for one another's methods. He greeted Poirot with a gruff nod after dismissing the constable at the door. "So, the hotel manager tells me you've got your nose in this already, Poirot. Couldn't resist, eh? Man dies in a locked room and you appear like a genie from a bottle." "My friend," Poirot replied, with a serene smile, "I did not appear. I was already here. A small but important distinction. I was dining, as was the unfortunate Lord Harrington." "Dining, eh?" Japp grunted, casting a professional eye around the sitting-room. "Well, on the face of it, it's simple enough. The quack says his heart gave out, door bolted, no signs of foul play. We'll get the post-mortem to confirm, but I'd be happy to have this one wrapped up by lunchtime." "And the feather?" Poirot asked softly. "The feather? Oh, the bit of fluff the manager was on about. Probably came in on someone's coat. Means nothing." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, though his tone suggested the opposite. "But you will agree, Chief Inspector, that in a room so meticulously tidy, a room bolted from the inside, the presence of an object that should not be there is a matter for consideration." "I'll consider it," Japp said noncommittally. "Right. I want to talk to the wife, the secretary, and the doctor, separately. In here will do. The rest of you, out." He gestured to me, Devereux, and, with a slight hesitation, to Poirot. "I will, if you permit, remain," Poirot stated, not asked. "My little grey cells, they have already been engaged. It would be a cruelty to disengage them now." Japp sighed, a sound of long-suffering familiarity. "Fine, but stay out of my way, Poirot. No fancy tricks." The first to be interviewed was Lady Beatrice. She had composed herself somewhat, the raw shock replaced by a fragile, icy calm. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her back ramrod straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked less like a grieving widow and more like a porcelain doll, beautiful and brittle. Japp was surprisingly gentle with her. He took her through the events of the previous evening, the dinner, the return to the suite, her husband retiring for the night. Her answers were quiet, clipped, and revealed nothing. "And your husband's mood, Lady Harrington, was it normal?" A flicker of something, bitterness, resentment, crossed her face before being smoothed away. "My husband was often irritable. Last night was no different." "You had no quarrel?" "We did not." The denial was flat, final. It was then that Poirot intervened, his voice so soft that it was almost an apology. "Forgive me, Lady Harrington, but last night, in the dining-room, there was a small moment. The actress, Miss Eleanor Vance, she passed your table. Your husband, he reacted, and so, if I may say so, did you. Your hand, it clenched the napkin in your lap. Why?" Beatrice's composure cracked. A faint, angry blush stained her pale cheeks. "I have no idea what you are talking about. I did not notice the woman." "You are quite certain?" Poirot pressed, his eyes full of a strange sympathy. "Because the exchange of glances between Miss Vance and your husband, it was most pointed. It suggested a history. My husband's affairs were his own business. I made it my policy not to inquire." A wise policy, perhaps, but a difficult one to maintain. "Tell me, madame, where is your jewel case?" The question was so unexpected it seemed to strike her like a physical blow. Japp shot Poirot a look of pure exasperation. My jewel case?" she stammered. "What has that to do with anything? It is in my dressing-room, of course." "And the magnificent diamond necklace you wore last night, is it there also?" "Yes, of course it is. Where else would it be?" She was flustered now, her icy control melting away to reveal a raw, nervous agitation. "Nowhere else, I am sure," Poirot said soothingly, and retreated, leaving Japp to finish his perfunctory questions. Next was Dr. Arbuthnot. He repeated his story with professional precision. Lord Harrington's chronic heart condition, the volatile temper that exacerbated it, and the nightly sleeping draught. "This draught, doctor, what did it consist of?" "A simple bromide solution, harmless, just enough to calm his nerves and ensure a peaceful sleep." "And you are certain he took it?" "I am. As I told you, I mixed it in his milk and watched him drink it myself." "And after he had retired, you went to your own room?" "I did." "And you heard nothing during the night? No cry, no sound of movement?" The doctor hesitated for the briefest of moments. "No," he said, a little too firmly. "Nothing at all. The suite is solidly built. I heard nothing until I came to wake him this morning." Poirot's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "You are a light sleeper, doctor." "Reasonably so, yes." "And your room, it shares a wall with Lord Harrington's bedroom?" "It does." "Curieux," Poirot murmured. and fell silent. Finally, it was the turn of Alastair Finch. The secretary was the epitome of cool efficiency. He stood before Japp, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral. He confirmed the timeline of the previous evening, his answers concise and devoid of emotion. "Mr. Finch," Poirot said, taking over the questioning, "you have been in Lord Harrington's employ for how long?" "5 years, monsieur." "You managed all his affairs, the professional and, perhaps, the personal." "My duties were comprehensive." "Then you would have been aware of his relationship with Miss Eleanor Vance." It was a statement, not a question. Finch's composure did not waver, but I saw a muscle jump in his jaw. "My employer's financial arrangements were confidential." "But a secret known to 3 people is no secret at all. It is a weapon. Tell me, Mr. Finch, was Lord Harrington planning to end this patronage?" The secretary's eyes darted towards the door of the bedroom. "His lordship's intentions were his own. But you knew them, did you not? He was a man who confided in you. He was growing tired of the arrangement, the expense, the potential for scandal. He was planning to break with Miss Eleanor Vance, and last night, when she passed the table, that glance was not of passion, it was of dismissal on his part, and fury on hers." Alastair Finch remained silent, his lips a thin, hard line. "And Lady Beatrice," Poirot continued, relentlessly, his voice like the steady chipping of a chisel on stone. "Was she aware of this, of the affair, and of his intention to end it?" "Lady Harrington and I," Finch said stiffly, "did not discuss such matters." "No?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "But you looked at her last night, after the incident with Miss Vance. You looked at her with a great pity. The pity of a man for a woman he esteems, a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage, a woman who would be perhaps greatly relieved by the death of her husband." "That's enough, Poirot," Japp boomed, stepping forward. "You're badgering the witness. Let the man be." Poirot stepped back, a small, satisfied smile on his lips. He had not, I realized, been seeking answers. He had been observing reactions. He had been throwing stones into the placid pond of their lies to see where the ripples went. After the interviews were concluded, Japp's men began their methodical work, dusting for fingerprints and making diagrams of the room. Japp, Poirot, and I stood in the sitting room, the air thick with unspoken questions. "Well," Japp said, scratching his head, "a messy business. A rich old goat with a young wife and a flashy mistress. Plenty of motive to go around if it was murder. But it isn't. The door was bolted from the inside. That's the long and the short of it. Case closed, barring anything from the M.E. The bolt is indeed a problem."
Chapter 4. The Gilded Cage. While Japp and his men continued their methodical, and in Poirot's view, unimaginative, examination of the crime scene, my friend declared that our own work must begin elsewhere. He had a sudden and pressing desire for what he termed a change of atmosphere. "The air in that suite, Hastings, it is thick with lies," he announced, once we had retrieved our hats and coats and were standing on the bustling thoroughfare of the Strand. "It is like trying to breathe in a swamp. We must seek a clearer air, a different perspective." "Where are we going?" I asked, hailing a taxi. "To Scotland Yard?" "Non," Poirot replied, giving the driver an address in Mayfair. "We are going to the theatre, or, more to be precise, to the leading lady." Our destination was, of course, the apartment of Miss Eleanor Vance. As the taxi wound its way through the elegant streets of Mayfair, I pondered what sort of woman we were about to meet. The brief glimpse in the Savoy dining room had suggested a creature of immense glamour and self-possession. The subsequent revelations from Finch painted a picture of a calculating courtesan, a woman whose luxurious lifestyle depended entirely on the whims of a man who was about to cast her aside. I expected to find a tigress, perhaps in tears, perhaps in a rage, but certainly in a state of high drama. The apartment building was discreetly opulent, its white stone facade exuding an air of expensive anonymity. A uniformed porter admitted us without question upon hearing Poirot's name, a name that, I was pleased to note, opened doors with an almost magical efficacy. Miss Vance's apartment was on the 3rd floor. The door was opened by a severe-looking maid in a black dress and starched white apron who looked at us with deep suspicion. Upon presenting his card, however, we were shown into a drawing-room that was a masterpiece of modern, and to my mind, rather cold luxury. It was decorated entirely in shades of white, cream, and silver. White silk curtains pooled on a pale gray carpet, chrome and glass tables held single, perfect white orchids, and the furniture was upholstered in a cream-colored velvet. It was less a home and more a stage set, a beautiful, sterile backdrop for its star occupant. And the star, when she entered, did not disappoint. Eleanor Vance was even more striking in daylight than she had been by the candlelight of the Savoy. She wore a flowing negligee of white satin trimmed with swansdown, which drifted about her as she moved. Her golden hair was artfully arranged, and her face, though pale, was perfectly made up. She carried a long cigarette holder, which she used not so much for smoking as for punctuating her sentences with elegant, theatrical gestures. She did not invite us to sit. She stood by the marble fireplace, one hand resting on the mantelpiece, and regarded us with an expression of cool, wearied amusement. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot," she said, her voice a low, husky drawl that was famously thrilling audiences in the West End. "I have read about you, of course. To what do I owe this unexpected honor? Have one of my leading men finally murdered a critic?" "Hélas, mademoiselle, my business is of a more serious nature. I have come from the Savoy Hotel. I was there this morning when the body of Lord Harrington was discovered." I watched her closely, expecting a gasp, a cry, perhaps even a swoon. She did nothing of the sort. Her expression did not change by so much as a flicker. She raised the cigarette holder to her lips, took a slow, deliberate puff, and exhaled a perfect plume of smoke. "Alfred, dead?" she said, her tone one of mild curiosity, as if hearing of the death of a distant acquaintance. "How very inconsiderate of him." "He was found in his bed," Poirot continued, his own face a mask of polite neutrality. "It appears his heart failed him in the night." "It would," she said with a small, brittle smile. "Alfred's heart was the most unreliable thing about him." This cold-blooded reaction took even me aback. Poirot, however, seemed entirely unfazed. "You knew him well, mademoiselle?" "As well as anyone can know a checkbook," she replied, turning to tap a speck of ash into a crystal dish. "Alfred was my patron, my benefactor. He appreciated my art, and I appreciated his generosity. It was a simple, commercial arrangement." An arrangement that, I understand, was about to be terminated. For the first time, a flash of genuine emotion appeared in her eyes. It was a hard, dangerous glint. "You've been talking to that little snake, Finch," she said, her voice losing its languid drawl and taking on a sharper edge. "Don't believe a word he says. Alfred adored me. He would never have left me. And yet, last night, you saw him, in the dining room. The glance you exchanged was not one of adoration. Last night, Alfred was in a foul mood. He was a sick old man, and he took his miseries out on everyone around him. I simply chose to not engage." She gave a dismissive wave of her cigarette holder. "You returned here to your apartment after your dinner.
I did. I was with my producer, Mr. Goldstein. We had supper at the Ivy and discussed the box office receipts. He brought me home at, it must have been 12:30. The porter will have seen us. And you did not leave the apartment again. My dear man, she said, looking him up and down with a condescending smile, where would I go? My public demands a flawless performance 8 times a week. For that, I require my beauty sleep. Poirot's gaze drifted around the sterile white room. It came to rest on the trim of her negligée. That is a most charming garment, mademoiselle. The swansdown, it is so very soft, so very white. She glanced down at her sleeve. This old thing, one must be comfortable in one's own home, don't you think? Indeed, it is a material of great delicacy. It sheds, does it not? A little feather here, a little feather there. It is unavoidable. Eleanor Vance's eyes narrowed. She understood at once where his questions were leading. If you are suggesting what I think you are suggesting, Monsieur Poirot, you are more of a fool than you look. Why on earth would I want Alfred dead? He was my golden goose. His death leaves me financially embarrassed, to put it mildly. A temporary embarrassment, perhaps, Poirot suggested. Lord Harrington was a man of great wealth. It is possible he made provision for you in his will. A harsh, ugly laugh escaped her lips. Alfred, provide for a discarded mistress. You did not know him. His wife will get everything, the long-suffering, pathetic little Beatrice. She'll be the richest widow in London. There was a venom in her tone when she spoke of Lady Beatrice that was far more potent than any she had used for the dead man. Poirot took a step closer. He picked up a small, silver-framed photograph from one of the tables. It showed a much younger Eleanor Vance, smiling brightly, with her arm linked through that of a handsome young man in the uniform of an army officer. "Your brother, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, gently. Her face softened for a moment, the hard mask of the actress falling away to reveal something vulnerable and sad. "My fiancé," she said quietly. "He was killed at the Somme." "My sincerest condolences," Poirot said, replacing the photograph with great care. "A great tragedy. So many fine young men were lost. Lord Harrington's fortune, it was greatly increased by the war, was it not? His steel mills, his munitions factories." Eleanor Vance snatched the cigarette from its holder and stubbed it out with a vicious jab. Her face was once again a mask of ice. "I think this interview is over, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice trembling with a rage she could no longer conceal. "You will show yourself out." We did as we were told. As we stood on the pavement waiting for another taxi, I was bursting with conclusions. "Well, that's that then," I declared. "She's as good as confessed. She hated him, not just for planning to cast her off, but for profiting from the war that killed her fiancé. And the feather, it's from her dressing gown. She must have gone to his room last night, somehow got past the bolt, smothered him with a pillow, and a feather came loose." Poirot listened to my excited theory with a patient, almost sad smile. He shook his head slowly. "You build a magnificent house of cards, Hastings. It is beautiful, it is dramatic, but it has one small flaw. And what's that? It is not the truth," he said simply. "Mademoiselle Vance, she is a magnificent actress. Today she gave a great performance, the cold-hearted woman of the world. But a performance it was. She is hiding something, yes, but it is not murder. But the feather, Poirot, it matches. Ah, the feather. Yes, the feather matches. It is a perfect fit. And that, my dear Hastings, is precisely what is wrong with it."
Chapter 5. A Matter of Timetables. "What do you mean, precisely what is wrong with it?" I demanded as our taxi rattled back towards the Savoy. "The feather is a direct link, Poirot. It is the very definition of a clue." Poirot sighed, a sound of gentle exasperation, and carefully adjusted the position of a small vase of artificial flowers that was trembling in its holder on the cab's partition. "Hastings, You have a romantic soul. You see a clue, and you wish it to be a signpost, a beacon of light in the darkness, pointing with a dramatic finger and crying, "J'accuse!" But the real world, it is not so theatrical. A true clue, mon ami, is a shy and retiring thing. It is a smudge of mud on a carpet, a carelessly dropped train ticket, a remark made that is 5 minutes out of synchronicity. It is a thing of accident. He leaned forward, tapping my knee for emphasis. But this feather, it is not an accident. It is a statement. It is a placard. It is placed beside the bed of a dead man in a locked room, and it belongs to the one person who has the most obvious motive for wishing him dead. It is too neat, too perfect. It is as if the murderer has not only committed the crime, but has also been so kind as to write out a full confession and leave it on the pillow. And that, Hastings, I do not believe. "So you think the feather was planted?" I asked, my own beautiful house of cards beginning to tremble. "I think it is a possibility that we must consider with the utmost gravity," he replied. "If one wishes to frame Mademoiselle Vance, what could be more simple? One obtains a feather from her apartment, from her person, and one deposits it at the scene of the crime. The police, they will make the connection, just as you have done, and they will look no further." "But who would do that?" "Ah," Poirot sat back, a gleam in his eye. "That is the question of intelligence, is it not? The person who has a true reason to wish Lord Harrington dead, and who is clever enough to point the finger of blame elsewhere?" Our return to the Savoy was met with an atmosphere of controlled chaos. Japp had established a temporary headquarters in a small, private dining room on the ground floor. He was seated at a table covered with papers, looking hot and bothered. "Ah, there you are," he grunted as we entered. "Been off on a wild goose chase, I suppose." "One might say we have been chasing a swan, Chief Inspector," Poirot replied placidly, taking a seat opposite him. "Well, while you've been doing that, I've been doing some proper police work," Japp announced, with an air of satisfaction. "The preliminary report from the M.E. is in. It's exactly what the doc said. Massive coronary failure. Heart just packed it in. No signs of suffocation, no poison in the preliminary stomach contents. On the face of it, he just died." "On the face of it," Poirot repeated softly. "But there is more, is there not? Otherwise you would not look so triumphant." Japp leaned forward, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "There is something, a tiny puncture mark on his lordship's upper arm, so small the M.E. almost missed it, like a pinprick, and a faint trace of bruising around it, as if from a hypodermic needle." My mind raced. "A poison! Injected!" That's what I thought, but the talk screen is coming back clean so far. Nothing obvious anyway. But here's the thing. We found this in the bathroom at the bottom of the linen basket, tucked away under some towels. He pushed a small object across the table. It was a hypodermic syringe, small and delicate, of the type a doctor might use for a routine injection. It was empty. It's been wiped clean of prints, of course, but it was there. In the suite. "And who had access to such an instrument?" Poirot asked, though his face showed he already knew the answer. "Exactly!" Japp slammed his hand on the table, making the papers jump. "Dr. Arbuthnot! He admits it's his. Says he must have left it behind by mistake on a previous visit, that it must have been in his bag. A likely story. A doctor, of all people, being careless with a needle." "It seems improbable," Poirot agreed. "You have a motive for the good doctor?" "Working on it," Japp said, tapping a pencil against his teeth. "But a man's medical history is a private thing. A doctor could know secrets, secrets worth killing for. Blackmail, perhaps? Or maybe the old man was going to cut him off, find a new physician. We're digging into his finances." This, I had to admit, was a far more plausible theory than my own.
Dr. Arbuthnot had the means, the opportunity, he was in the adjoining room all night, and now a potential weapon. The feather began to seem like the theatrical distraction Poirot had claimed it was. "And what of the bolt on the door?" Poirot asked, bringing the conversation back to the central, intractable problem. If the doctor injected Lord Harrington, how did he then bolt the door from the inside and disappear? "That's the snag, I'll grant you. But there are ways, tricks with strings and wires. We're having the door and the lock examined by our experts. There has to be an explanation." Poirot did not seem to be listening. He was staring at a document on the table. It was a preliminary timetable Japp's men had drawn up based on the initial interviews. 11 p.m. Dr. Arbuthnot administers sleeping draught to Lord Harrington. 11:05 p.m. Dr. Arbuthnot sees Lord Harrington get into bed, retires to his own room. 11:10 p.m. Lady Harrington bids her husband good night, retires to her own room. 11:15 p.m. Alistair Finch checks in with his lordship one last time, is dismissed for the night. 12:30 a.m. Eleanor Vance returns to her apartment in Mayfair, confirmed by the porter. 8 a.m. Dr. Arbuthnot attempts to wake Lord Harrington. No response. 8:15 a.m. Hotel staff force open the bolted door. Body is discovered. Poirot picked up the paper, his eyes scanning the neat, typed lines. "The Times. They are so precise, are they not? Everyone has their alibi, their place in the sequence of events." "Seems straightforward enough," Japp said. "Too straightforward," Poirot murmured. He turned to me. "Hustings, be so good as to fetch me a timetable for the London Underground." "The Underground?" I asked, baffled. "What do you earth for?" "An inquiry for the little grey cells. Humor me, my friend." Slightly bemused, I went and procured the requested item from the hotel concierge. Poirot spread it out on the table, his finger tracing the various colored lines that represented the arteries of the city. He was seemingly particularly interested in the District and Piccadilly lines, his lips moving as he made silent calculations. "Japp," he said suddenly, looking up from the map, "I would like you to find out for me, if you please, about the telephone calls. Specifically, any calls made from a public telephone booth in the vicinity of the Temple Tube Station between the hours of 11:30 last night and 1 o'clock this morning." Japp stared at him as if he had gone mad. "Temple Station? What's that got to do with anything? We're in the Savoy." "Nevertheless," Poirot insisted calmly, "humor me." Grumbling, Japp gave the order to one of his subordinates. Poirot, for his part, folded the underground map neatly and placed it in his pocket. Then he stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the bustle of the London traffic. "The timetable of a train, Hastings, is a beautiful thing. It is a promise of order. It tells you that if you are at point A at a certain time, you will arrive at point B at another predictable time. The events of last night have been presented to us as just such a timetable, neat, orderly, and logical. But I suspect that one of our passengers, he has secretly changed trains." The red herring had been thrown into the water. The syringe pointed squarely at the doctor, a suspect with means and opportunity, if not yet a clear motive. Japp was hooked, pursuing this new, tangible line of inquiry with all the tenacity of a bulldog. But Hercule Poirot, I could see, was not interested in the bait. He was looking at the currents, at the flow of the water itself, convinced that the truth lay not in the obvious lure, but in the subtle, almost invisible disturbance it had left in its wake.
Chapter 6. The Inconsistency of the Last Train. An hour passed. To me, it was an hour of fruitless inactivity. I paced the small room Jap had commandeered, growing more convinced by the minute that the doctor was our man, and that we were simply waiting for the final, damning piece of evidence to fall into place. Jap, for his part, was of a similar mind. He had dispatched men to look into Dr. Arbuthnot's financial situation, and was awaiting the results with a gruff, impatient confidence. Poirot alone seemed perfectly content. He had seated himself in a straight-backed chair, corrected its angle so that it was perfectly parallel with the edge of a nearby rug, and composed himself into a state of almost perfect stillness. His eyes were closed, but I knew he was not sleeping. The little grey cells, as he was so fond of saying, were working at a furious pace. His focus was absolute, a silent, intellectual energy that was almost palpable in the tense atmosphere of the room. Finally, the constable Jap had dispatched returned, looking slightly bewildered by the nature of his errand. He held a small notebook in his hand. "Got that information you wanted, sir," he said, addressing Jap, but glancing uncertainly at Poirot. "About the public telephone box outside Temple Station." "Well, out with it, man," Jap grumbled, clearly seeing it as a waste of good police time. "Let's get this nonsense over with so we can get back to the real work." The constable cleared his throat and read from his notes. "Only one call made from that box between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. last night, sir. A single brief call, placed at 11:52 p.m., lasted less than a minute. The operator was able to confirm it. It was a local call to a number in Mayfair." My interest was piqued despite myself. Mayfair? Eleanor Vance's number? The constable nodded. "That's right, sir. We checked the exchange. It was a call to the number registered to Miss Vance's apartment." Jap threw his hands up in exasperation. "So what? Some stage-door Johnny calls up the famous actress late at night and gets told where to go by her maid. It's meaningless. It has nothing to do with a murder at the Savoy." "Perhaps," Poirot said, opening his eyes. They were shining with a brilliant, focused light. "Tell me, constable, did anyone see the person who made this call?" "No, sir, not that we can find. It's a quiet spot at that time of night. The ticket collector at the station was on his break, and there was no one about on the street." "Thank you, constable. You have been most helpful," Poirot said with a gracious nod. The man, looking relieved, made a hasty exit. "A dead end, just as I said," Jap grunted, turning back to his papers. "Au contraire, my friend," Poirot said, rising from his chair. "It is not a dead end. It is a signpost, a most illuminating signpost, pointing the way through the fog." He walked over to the table and picked up the timetable of the evening's events. His finger rested on one of the entries. 11:15 p.m. Alistair Finch checks in with his lordship one last time. Is dismissed for the night. "Mr. Finch," Poirot said thoughtfully, "a man of precision, a man of timetables and schedules. He leaves his employer at 11:15 p.m. Where does he go?" "He has a small flat in Pimlico," Jap supplied, consulting his own notes. "Said he went straight to home, took the Underground from Embankment." "Did he indeed?" Poirot retrieved the Underground map from his pocket and spread it on the table. "Embankment is on the District line, is it not? And to get to Pimlico he would need to change at Victoria. A simple journey. But Temple Station, where our mysterious telephone call was made, is also on the District line. It is the stop before Embankment when travelling east." He looked from me to Jap, his eyes bright with the thrill of the intellectual chase. "Consider the geography, my friends. Mr. Finch leaves the suite at 11:15. He says he goes to Embankment Station to travel west towards Victoria. But a telephone call is made at 11:52 from Temple Station to the east of here to the woman at the heart of this affair. The journey on foot from the Savoy to Temple is no more than 5 or 6 minutes. Why would a man intending to go home to Pimlico walk in the opposite direction to make a secret telephone call?" "Perhaps it wasn't Finch who made the call," I suggested. "It is a possibility,"
Poirot conceded, "but let us examine another. Let us examine the time. Mr. Finch is a man who lives by the clock. His lordship, we are told, was a tyrant for punctuality. The entire household ran on a precise schedule. And yet there is an inconsistency." He tapped the timetable again. "Mr. Finch tells us he left at 11:15. But think, Hastings, the last trains on the Underground, they run at what time?" "Around midnight, I suppose, a little after, on some lines." "Precisely. A man going home on the Underground at that hour is conscious of the time. He does not dawdle. He does not take a detour to make an unnecessary telephone call, especially not a call to a woman his employer has just had a silent but furious confrontation with. But what if the time is wrong? What if Mr. Finch did not leave at 11:15? "The doctor and Lady Harrington both confirm the time," Japp pointed out. "They confirm the time they last saw him. But the suite is large. There is the sitting room, the bedroom, Lady Beatrice's room, the doctor's room, Mr. Finch's own small office. Who is to say he left the suite immediately? He could have lingered. He could have waited until the others had retired." Poirot began to pace the room, his steps small and precise, his energy filling the small space. It is here, in the detail of the time, that the whole story unravels. We have a timetable given to us by the suspects, but it is a false timetable. It is a construction designed to mislead. The syringe, the feather, they are the loud, dramatic distractions. They are designed to draw our eyes to the doctor, to the actress. But the true clue, the tiny fatal flaw in the murderous plan, is a matter of minutes. It is the 37 minutes between 11:15, when Finch said he left, and 11:52, when a mysterious telephone call was made from a station in the wrong direction. He stopped and looked at us, his head on one side. "Chief Inspector, I have a request. I would like you to find for me the ticket collector from Embankment Station who was on duty last night. I wish to ask him a very simple question." "And what's that?" Japp asked, now looking thoroughly intrigued. His focus entirely shifted from the doctor to Poirot's new line of reasoning. "I wish to ask him," Poirot said, a faint, triumphant smile playing on his lips, "if he remembers seeing a man of Mr. Alistair Finch's description. A man in a hurry. A man, perhaps, who was running to catch the very last train."
Chapter 7. The Secret Timetable. Chief Inspector Japp, for all his bluster and professed faith in the tangible, was not a fool. He knew from long and often baffling experience that when Hercule Poirot developed a fixation on a seemingly trivial detail, be it a misplaced teacup or the timetable of a suburban train, it was wise to pay attention. And so, with a sigh that conveyed a world of weary resignation, he dispatched a constable with orders to locate, by any means necessary, the ticket collector who had been on duty at Embankment Station the previous night. The wait that followed was charged with a new kind of tension. The focus of the investigation had pivoted. The tangible clues, the syringe that pointed to the doctor, the feather that implicated the actress, seemed to fade in importance. They were, I began to see, like the garish puppets in a Punch and Judy show, designed to draw the eye while the real action took place unseen. The true mystery, Poirot had decided, lay in a handful of missing minutes and a short unobserved walk through the London night. It was nearly 2 hours later when the constable returned, accompanied by a small, wiry man in a London Underground uniform, who clutched his cap in his hands and looked thoroughly intimidated by his surroundings. His name was Albert Feathers, a coincidence that caused a brief flicker of amusement in Poirot's eyes. "This is the man, sir, Mr. Feathers. He was on the westbound platform at Embankment last night until closing." Japp leaned forward, his manner brusque. "We need to know if you saw a gentleman last night, Mr. Feathers, around 11:30, maybe a bit later. Tall, slim, dark hair, wearing a dinner jacket. Looked like he was in a hurry."
Mr. Feathers screwed up his face in concentration, a good, honest face that was accustomed to observing the daily flood of humanity. "Can't say I did, sir. Not at Embankment. It was quietening down by then. The theater crowds had all gone through. I'd 'a' noticed a toff in a dinner jacket, especially if he was running." Jap sat back, a look of "I told you so" directed at Poirot. "There you are, another dead end." Poirot, who had been observing the ticket collector with a benign smile, now leaned forward. "Monsieur Feathers," he said, his voice gentle and encouraging, "you are a man of routine, are you not? You work the same shift, you see the same things. But sometimes the routine is broken, something is different. I want you to think very carefully. The last train, the very last westbound service. It is often a train for those in a hurry, for those who have misjudged the time." "That it is, sir," Feathers agreed, warming to the subject. "The last chancers, we call 'em. Always a few, pantin' and puffin' as the gates are closin'." "And last night," Poirot continued smoothly, "did you have any such last chancers?" "One, sir. Yes, I remember him now. But it wasn't at Embankment. It was at Westminster. I was on the platform there just before my shift ended, having a word with my colleague. This gent, he came flying down the stairs just as the whistle was blowing for the last train to Victoria. The guard held the door for him. He was in a right state, I can tell you. No hat, dinner jacket all askew. Looked like he'd been running for his life." "And this gentleman," Poirot asked, his voice barely a whisper, "could you describe him?" "Tallish, slim, dark hair, wearing a dinner jacket. Looked like he was well dressed, you could tell, despite the state he was in. Pale face, looked fair panicked. Yes, that's him, the chap you described." A profound silence fell upon the room. Jap stared, his mouth slightly agape. I felt a thrill of discovery, the tumblers of the lock clicking into place. Finch had not gone to Embankment. He had run to Westminster, the next station down the line, and had only just caught the last train for Victoria. His alibi, his neat and tidy timetable, was not just flawed, it was a complete fabrication. "Thank you, Monsieur Feathers," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming. "You have been more helpful than you can possibly know." Once the ticket collector had been dismissed, Jap slammed his fist on the table, his frustration giving way to a hunter's excitement. "The liar! He lied to us from the start. Right. Let's have him in here. We'll see how his cool composure stands up to this." Alistair Finch was summoned. He entered the room with the same air of quiet efficiency, but I thought I could detect a new strain around his eyes, a faint tremor in the hand that rested on the back of a chair. He had been expecting this. "Mr. Finch," Jap began, dispensing with any pleasantries, "we've been reviewing your statement. You told us you left the suite at 11:15 p.m. and took the Underground from Embankment to your home in Pimlico. Is that correct?" "It is," Finch replied, his voice level. "It's a lie," Jap snapped. "The ticket collector at Embankment didn't see you, but his colleague at Westminster did. He saw you running for the last train in a state of panic at 12 minutes past midnight. Now, would you care to explain why you lied to the police?" The secretary's carefully constructed mask crumbled. His face went pale, then flushed a dark mottled red. He looked from Jap's accusatory glare to Poirot's calm, watchful gaze, and he seemed to deflate, all the rigid control seeping out of him. He stammered, then fell silent. "The telephone call to Miss Vance at Temple Station at 11:58. That was you, was it not? You walked east to Temple, made the call, and then had to run all the way to Westminster to catch your last train home. Why, Mr. Finch? Why this elaborate deception?" Finch sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. The cool, efficient secretary was gone, replaced by a man in the grip of a profound and desperate emotion. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. "It was not for the reason you think," he said, his voice hoarse. "It had nothing to do with his death." "Then tell us the real reason," Japp demanded. Finch took a deep, shuddering breath. "I lied about the time. I did not leave the suite at 11:15. I waited. I hid in my office until I was sure Lord Harrington and the doctor were asleep." "Why?" The secretary's gaze lifted, and he looked toward the door as if he could see through it to the 4th floor, to the woman sitting in the silent suite. "For Beatrice," he whispered. The name, spoken with such raw intimacy, was a confession in itself. Lord Harrington was a monster. He treated her with a casual cruelty that was soul-destroying. She was his possession, a beautiful object to be displayed. I couldn't bear to see it. We found solace in each other. Last night, after he had taken his sleeping draught, was to be our chance to speak, to make plans. He was growing more suspicious, more jealous. We had to decide what to do. "To run away together?" Poirot prompted gently. "Yes, to leave him, to go abroad. She was willing to give up everything, the money, the title, just to be free of him. I stayed in the suite until nearly 11:30 when she came to my office. We talked for perhaps 20 minutes. That is why I was so late. That is why I had to run for the train. The telephone call to Eleanor Vance at Temple Station, that was a foolish, desperate idea of mine. I thought if questions were asked, it would look as though I had my own suspicions of her, that it would divert attention from us." He looked up, his face a mask of earnest desperation. "But we did not kill him. When Beatrice left me, he was alive and sleeping in his bolted room. We are guilty of deception, yes, but not of murder. You must believe me." He had confessed to a secret love, to lies, to a powerful motive for murder. He and Beatrice Harrington now stood at the very center of the web. His story explained the inconsistent timetable, the mysterious phone call, and yet, as I looked at Poirot, I saw not the satisfaction of a puzzle solved, but a deep, thoughtful frown. The lies had surfaced, but the truth, Poirot's expression seemed to say, was still submerged in the deepest, darkest water.
Chapter 8. The Sound of a Lock Turning. Alistair Finch's confession had detonated in the center of the investigation, and the shockwave now moved inexorably towards one person, Lady Beatrice Harrington. Japp, his face set like a bulldog's, was for bringing her in for questioning immediately. Finch was placed under the watch of a constable in an adjoining room, his confession having transformed him from a person of interest into the primary suspect, along with the woman for whom he had risked everything. "It's an open and shut case now," Japp declared, pacing the room with renewed vigor. "They were in it together, the lovers, a classic motive. They planned to run away, but why do that when you can have the husband's money as well? They kill him, Finch creates a convoluted alibi, and the lady plays the grieving widow. It's as old as the hills." "And the locked room?" Poirot asked, his voice a quiet counterpoint to Japp's booming certainty. "The bolt, drawn from the inside. How do you explain that?" "He's a clever devil, that Finch. He rigged it somehow. We'll find the trick of it. The important thing is the motive. We have it now, clear as day." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his gaze distant, "but a motive is not a proof. We have the story of Mr. Finch. We do not yet have the story of Lady Harrington. and I fancy, my friend, that it will not be quite the same." Lady Beatrice was not summoned. Poirot insisted, with a firmness that Japp found difficult to refuse, that they go to her. "She is a woman who has received a great shock," he argued. "To subject her to a formal interrogation now would be a cruelty. We will have a conversation, you and I. We will be gentle. A soul in distress is like a tightly coiled spring. Apply too much pressure, and it will snap. But with a delicate touch, it may uncoil and show you its true shape." We found her in the sitting room of the suite, which had now been released by the police. The body of her husband had been removed, but his presence lingered, a palpable void in the opulent space. She was standing by the window, looking down at the river, a solitary, tragic figure. She had changed from her mourning dress into a simple, severe black gown that accentuated her pallor and the dark circles under her eyes. She turned as we entered, and her expression was not of fear, but of a profound and weary exhaustion, as if she had been carrying a terrible weight for a very long time. "Lady Harrington," Japp began, his voice softer than I had expected, "we are afraid we have to ask you some more questions. Mr. Finch has made a statement." At the mention of Alistair's name, a flicker of life returned to her eyes. It was a spark of pure, unadulterated fear. "Alistair, what has he said?" "He has told us everything, madame," Poirot said, stepping forward. His voice was full of a gentle, almost paternal compassion. "He has told us of your affection for one another, of your plans to leave this life behind, of your meeting last night after your husband was asleep." The color drained completely from her face. She swayed slightly, and I thought for a moment she might faint. She reached out a hand to steady herself on the back of a chair. For a long moment she said nothing. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of a tugboat's horn on the river. Then, to my astonishment, she straightened up. The fragile, broken doll disappeared, and in her place stood a woman of unexpected strength. A deep, shuddering breath escaped her lips, the sound of a decision being made. "He told you the truth," she said, her voice low but clear and steady. "We were in love. We were going to run away. I could not endure another day of this life." "And you met with him last night?" Poirot prompted. "Yes, in his office. It was as he said. We talked about our future, about freedom." "And the time, madame? You left his office at what time?" "I don't know exactly. It must have been close to midnight. I was not thinking of the clock." "And you went directly to your room?" She hesitated. Her gaze dropped to the carpet, and her hands, which had been resting on the chair, clenched into tight fists. This was the moment, I knew, the emotional turning point. The tightly coiled spring was about to release. "No," she whispered, the word barely audible. "No, I did not go to my room." Japp took a step forward. "Where did you go, Lady Harrington?" She lifted her head, and her eyes, glittering with unshed tears, met Poirot's. It was to him and him alone that she spoke. "I went to his room," she said, her voice cracking. "To my husband's room. I had to. I couldn't just leave. After 10 years of marriage, I couldn't just vanish like a thief in the night. I owed him a final word, a goodbye. Or perhaps," her voice grew bitter, "I simply wanted to see his face one last time when I told him I was leaving him for a better man." Japp drew in a sharp breath. "You went into the bedroom after you left Finch?" "Yes." "And was he awake?" She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek. "No, he was fast asleep. The sleeping drug that the doctor had given him was a strong one. He was breathing heavily. He looked old and helpless. All the anger and the cruelty were gone. He was just a tired old man." "And you spoke to him?" Poirot asked, his voice hushed. "No, I couldn't. All the brave, angry words I had prepared, they died in my throat. I just stood there by his bed for a minute, and I felt pity. I turned to leave. I closed the door quietly behind me, and then—" "Yes, madame," Poirot prompted, his focus absolute. "As I stood in the corridor, in the darkness, I heard it, the sound of the lock turning in the door, the bolt. I heard it slide home." The room fell silent once more. Japp and I stared at her, dumbfounded. "You heard the bolt slide shut?" Japp demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. "After you had left the room? But that's impossible. The man was asleep." "I know what I heard," she insisted, her voice gaining a desperate strength. "It was a soft sound, a metallic scrape, but I heard it. I thought perhaps he had not been as deeply asleep as I had imagined, that he had woken up and, as was his habit, bolted the door for the night. I was terrified he had seen me. I ran to my room and locked my own door. I did not sleep all night. And then this morning—" Her voice trailed off, her composure finally breaking. She sank into the chair and began to sob, not with the fragile grief of a widow, but with the harsh, racking despair of a soul that has reached the end of its endurance. Her confession was a bombshell. It placed her in the room at the crucial time. It provided a new, impossible mystery. If Lord Harrington was asleep, who bolted the door? If he was awake, why did he not raise the alarm? And if he bolted it himself, how did he then die of a heart attack induced by a secret injection? Japp was ready to dismiss it as a hysterical woman's fantasy, a lie to protect her lover. But Poirot held up a hand. He walked over to the weeping woman and stood before her, his expression of profound gravity. "Madame," he said, and his voice was so gentle that she looked up at him, her tear-streaked face a mask of misery. "One small detail, if you please. When you stood by your husband's bed, did you notice anything on the bedside table? Anything that should not have been there?" She frowned, thinking back through the haze of her memory. "No, nothing. Just his glass of water, his pill-box, the lamp." "There was no feather?" Poirot asked. "A small white feather?" She stared at him, her eyes wide with genuine confusion. "A feather? No, I am certain of it. There was no feather. I would have seen it." Chapter 9. A Little Drama of the Mind. "The time has come," Hercule Poirot announced, his voice imbued with a quiet, theatrical gravity, "to assemble the players." We were back in the private room that Japp had commandeered. The chief inspector, buoyed by the lover's confessions, was preparing to proceed with a formal arrest. Poirot, however, had stopped him with a raised hand and an expression of such profound seriousness that even Japp was compelled to pause. "What are you on about now, Poirot?" he grumbled. "We've got them, the lovers, motive, opportunity, lies, it's all there." "We have a story," Poirot corrected gently, "a sad and desperate story of a secret love, but it is not the story of a murder. For that, we must look elsewhere. I wish for everyone to be brought to the suite. Lady Harrington, Mr. Finch, Dr. Arbuthnot, and Miss Eleanor Vance." "Vance?" Japp exclaimed.
What's she got to do with it now? We know the feather was a plant." "Precisely," Poirot said, his eyes twinkling, "and I wish to know who planted it. An actress should not be denied her place in the final act, n'est-ce pas? Humor me, my friend. Let us gather them all. Let us see how they play their parts when they are all together on the same stage." And so, a short while later, the stage was set. The sitting room of the Harrington suite, a place already so heavy with secrets and sorrow, became a theater of suspicion. The four suspects sat in a carefully spaced semicircle, facing Poirot, who stood before the fireplace like a diminutive but commanding actor about to deliver a soliloquy. I stood near the door with Japp beside me, a silent, watchful audience. The atmosphere was electric with resentment and fear. Lady Beatrice and Alistair Finch sat apart, not daring to look at each other, their shared secret now a public shame. Dr. Arbuthnot perched on the edge of his chair, polishing his spectacles with a nervous, repetitive motion. Eleanor Vance, summoned from her Mayfair apartment under protest, radiated a cold, furious contempt. She was dressed in a chic black suit, a dramatic contrast to the white negligee of our first meeting, and she tapped a perfectly manicured nail against the arm of her chair in a rhythm of impatient fury. Poirot began, his voice calm and conversational. "We are gathered here because a man has died, and in the wake of his death there has been a veritable symphony of falsehoods. Each of you," his gaze moved slowly from one face to the next, "has told a lie, or, if you prefer, you have withheld a portion of the truth." He looked first at the lovers. "You, Lady Harrington, and you, Mr. Finch, you hid your love. You constructed a false timetable of your movements to conceal your final desperate meeting. You lied out of love and out of fear, a very human thing to do." He turned to Eleanor Vance, whose expression hardened. "You, mademoiselle, you also lied. You portrayed yourself as the cool, financially secure woman of the world, for whom Lord Harrington's death was a mere inconvenience. But the truth is otherwise. My inquiries, they have revealed that you are on the verge of bankruptcy. Your benefactor's decision to cast you aside was not an inconvenience, it was a catastrophe. His death, however, if he had made provision for you in his will, would be a salvation." Miss Vance's face was pale with fury. "This is an outrage." "Is it, mademoiselle, or is it merely the truth? A truth you concealed behind the magnificent performance?" Finally, his eyes came to rest on the doctor. "And you, Dr. Arbuthnot, your lie was the smallest, but perhaps the most significant. You told us you heard nothing in the night, but you hesitated when you said it. You are a light sleeper in a room that shares a wall with the deceased. You are a man of medicine. Your ears are attuned to the sounds of distress. I ask you again, doctor, did you hear nothing?" Dr. Arbuthnot stopped polishing his glasses. He looked down at his hands, his face a picture of professional misery. "It was nothing," he mumbled. "A small sound, a muffled cry. Around midnight, I thought perhaps he was having a nightmare. His sleeping draughts often gave him vivid dreams. I listened for a moment, but the sound was not repeated. I thought no more of it." "A muffled cry," Poirot repeated, storing the fact away. "You see, each of you held back a piece of the puzzle, but now we have all the pieces on the table, and they present us with two impossibilities." He held up one finger. "Impossibility first, the feather. Lady Harrington was in this room at midnight. She is certain there was no feather on the bedside table. Yet when the body was discovered in the morning, the feather was there. Therefore, the feather was placed in the room after midnight." He held up a second finger. "Impossibility second, the bolt. Lady Harrington leaves the room at midnight, closing the door behind her. She then hears the bolt slide shut on the inside. Lord Harrington is in a deep, drugged sleep. He could not have bolted it. Therefore, someone else was in the room with him, someone who bolted the door after Lady Harrington had left. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The room was utterly still. "So we have a person," Poirot continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Let us call him X. This person, X, is in the room with a sleeping Lord Harrington when Lady Beatrice enters. X hides. Lady Beatrice leaves. X then bolts the door. Sometime between then and the morning, X kills Lord Harrington with a hypodermic needle, places the feather on the table to incriminate Miss Vance, and then vanishes from a room that is bolted from the inside. It is a trick worthy of Whodunit, is it not?" He looked around at their faces, each one a mask of stunned comprehension. "But what if we look at it from a different angle? Let us construct a little drama of the mind. Let us imagine that the muffled cry the doctor heard was not from a nightmare. Let us imagine it was the sound of a man awaking to find a needle being plunged into his arm. A man who, in his last moments of consciousness, does not cry for help, but performs one last familiar action, the action of a man obsessed with his own security, the action of bolting his door." "But that's impossible," Japp burst out. "The M.E. said the injection would have been almost instantaneous." "Almost is a very accommodating word, my friend. It allows for a few seconds, and a few seconds is all that is required. But this drama does not explain the feather. The feather which was not there when Lady Harrington was in the room, but was there in the morning. How did it get there?" He let the question hang in the air, a final insoluble riddle. His eyes, bright and sharp as a bird, scanned their faces, searching, probing. "The person who committed this crime is not merely a murderer. They are a logician of the first order. They have constructed a puzzle of exquisite, almost perfect complexity. But they have made one mistake. They have left behind a single tiny flaw in their reasoning, a flaw that Hercule Poirot has found." He stood in the center of the room, a small, quiet man, holding 4 souls in the palm of his hand. The trap was set. The psychological pressure was at its peak. The truth of the bolt and the truth of the feather are contradictory. They cannot both exist, unless one of them is not what it appears to be at all. Only one person in this room knows which it is. Only one person knows the simple, devastating secret of the serpent at the Savoy.
Chapter 10. The Truth of the Serpent. Poirot let the silence in the room stretch, allowing the weight of his final statement to press down upon the 4 suspects. He looked from one to the other, his gaze lingering, as if making a final assessment of their souls. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room with a devastating clarity. "The truth of the bolt and the truth of the feather," he repeated softly. "They are the 2 pillars of this case, and they appear to stand in opposition, but they do not. They are, in fact, part of the same single diabolical design. To understand how, we must first sweep away the distractions." His gaze fell upon Lady Beatrice and Alastair Finch. "Your love affair, your lies about the time, they were not the cause of this murder. They were merely an opportunity, a convenience for the murderer, who knew of your secret meetings and used the chaos of your timetable to mask his own. You are guilty of infidelity, yes, but of murder, no. Your passions are of the heart, not of the cold-blooded mind that planned this."
He turned to Eleanor Vance, who watched him with narrowed, hostile eyes. "And you, mademoiselle, you were the perfect red herring, a woman with a clear motive of financial desperation and a history with the deceased. The feather was a brilliant piece of theatrical misdirection, designed to lead the police directly to your door. You were to be the scapegoat, the star of a drama in which you had been cast without your knowledge." "Then who?" Japp demanded, his patience worn thin. Poirot ignored him. His entire attention was now fixed upon the fourth person, the quiet, unassuming man who had faded into the background. "We are left with a crime that required 3 things," Poirot said, his voice beginning to build in tempo. "Medical knowledge to procure and administer a poison that would perfectly mimic a heart attack, intimate access to the victim and his habits, and a mind of supreme cunning capable of devising a locked room puzzle of such elegance. Who possesses all 3? Only one person here, a man who was trusted implicitly, a man who held his patient's life in his hands every single day, a man who lied about the smallest thing, a muffled cry in the night, because he was at that moment listening with the ear of a murderer for the sound of his work being completed. Is it not so, Dr. Arbuthnot?" The doctor started as if struck. He snatched his spectacles from his nose, his face a mask of outrage. "This is preposterous. I have been this family's physician for 15 years. Why on earth would I harm Alfred?" "For a son," Poirot said, his voice dropping to a somber note. "For a son named Thomas Arbuthnot, a second lieutenant in the Royal Artillery, killed in action near Ypres in 1917. Killed not by an enemy shell, but by a faulty British one. A shell that exploded prematurely. A shell manufactured by a company owned by Lord Alfred Harrington." The color drained from the doctor's face, leaving it a ghastly mottled gray. The room was plunged into a shocked silence. "You discovered this fact only recently, did you not? A chance encounter with one of your son's old comrades. You learned that Harrington's greed, his cutting of corners on safety standards to maximize his war profits, was the direct cause of your son's death. And from that moment you began to plan your revenge, a quiet, patient, and terrible revenge." "This is a fantasy," he choked out, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Poirot continued. "Let us reconstruct the evening not as you told us to it, but as it truly happened. You administer the sleeping draught, yes, but in your bag you have a hypodermic needle filled with a concentrated solution of potassium chloride, an injection of which will stop the heart almost instantly, a death utterly indistinguishable from a massive coronary. You wait. You know of the lovers' affair. You know Lady Beatrice is distraught and may well seek a final confrontation. You wait in your room, listening. As you hoped, just after midnight, she goes to her husband's room. You hear her enter. You hear her leave. And this is your moment. You do not enter from the corridor. You enter through the connecting door from your own room, which you have left unlocked for this very purpose. You find Lord Harrington in his drugged sleep, and it is then that you administer the fatal injection." "The bolt!" Japp exclaimed. "What about the bolt?" "Ah, the bolt!" Poirot's eyes flashed. "Lady Harrington was telling the truth. She heard the bolt slide home after she left the room, but it was not her husband who shot it. It was you, Doctor. After injecting him, you walked to the main door and bolted it yourself.
to create the illusion of a suicide or a death from natural causes in a sealed room. But your patient, your victim, did not die instantly. The poison took a few seconds. In those seconds, roused by the sharp pain in his arm, he let out the muffled cry that you heard. He was a man obsessed with security. His last semi-conscious, instinctive act was to try to reach for the bolt himself, an act you had just performed for him. Then he died, and you were left in a locked room, but it was no puzzle to you. You simply returned to your own room through the connecting door and locked it from your side. In the morning, you raised the alarm. You have the main door, the one you bolted, forced open. The perfect, impossible crime. The feather, I breathed, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. But the doctor is too clever to leave it at that, Poirot said with a nod. He knows that a clever detective might question a death so convenient. He must create a suspect. So he has procured a swan's down feather from an item belonging to Miss Vance. After committing the murder, after returning to his room, he waits. He waits for an hour, perhaps 2. Then he takes the feather and a simple hollow tube. He steps out into the deserted hotel corridor, kneels down and pushes the feather under the bedroom door. A single puff of air from his tube, and the feather floats gently to rest near the bed. It was not there when Lady Beatrice was in the room, but it is there for the police to find in the morning. A beautiful, simple, and utterly damnable piece of misdirection. Dr. Arbuthnot was on his feet now, his face contorted with a mixture of fury and terror. "You cannot prove any of this. It is a web of insane conjecture." "Proof?" Poirot's voice was suddenly cold as ice. "The proof, doctor, is a matter of logic. A doctor, wishing to blow a feather under a door, would use an instrument that is clean, portable, and readily available to him, an instrument such as the hollow glass casing of his clinical thermometer. Chief Inspector," he said, turning to Japp, "I would ask you to search the doctor's medical bag. You will find his thermometer, but I predict you will find its protective case is missing. And when you find that case hidden amongst his belongings, a microscopic examination will reveal traces of swan's down inside. The serpent has shed its skin, doctor, but it has left its rattle behind." At that, Dr. Arbuthnot broke. The years of repressed grief, the cold fury, the immense strain of his deception, it all came crashing down. With a wild, animal cry of desperation, he lunged, not at Poirot, but towards the window, as if he might throw himself out. But Japp, moving with a surprising speed, was there to intercept him. The struggle was brief and pathetic. The quiet, unassuming physician, the serpent in the Savoy's garden, was a murderer, and his long, patient revenge had finally come to an end.
Chapter 11. The Weight of a Soul. The storm had passed. Dr. Arbuthnot had been taken away, a broken and silent man, his long-nurtured revenge having shattered into a pathetic ruin at the first touch of logic. Lady Beatrice and Alistair Finch had departed separately, their futures uncertain, their love affair now tainted by its proximity to a terrible crime. Eleanor Vance had swept out of the hotel with the righteous fury of a wronged queen, threatening lawsuits against anyone who dared to print her name in connection with the affair. The Harrington suite, once a stage for high drama, was now just a collection of expensive, empty rooms. The silence that had felt so menacing that first morning had returned, but it was a different quality of silence now,
one of exhaustion and finality. Poirot, Japp, and I were the last to remain. We stood in the sitting room, the late afternoon sun slanting through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Japp, for once, was subdued. He shook his head slowly, looking at the door through which the doctor had been led. "I'll be damned, Poirot," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I truly will. I never saw it. The quiet little doctor. All the while he was the serpent in the garden." "He was a man consumed by a great injustice," Poirot replied, his voice tired. He was meticulously straightening a stack of magazines on a side table, his innate need for order reasserting itself in the wake of the chaos. And when the soul is consumed by such a thing, it becomes unbalanced. It loses its sense of proportion. To Dr. Arbuthnot, the death of Lord Harrington was not a murder, it was an execution, a balancing of the scales. "He almost got away with it," I mused. "The locked room, the feather, it was a brilliant plan." "It was too brilliant, Hastings," Poirot corrected, turning to face us. "That was his mistake. A crime of passion is messy. It is full of errors, of clues left in haste. But this was a crime of the intellect. It was a puzzle, a challenge set for us by a man who was proud of his own cleverness. He wished not only to kill his enemy, but also to demonstrate his own intellectual superiority. The feather, the syringe, the bolt on the door, they were all flourishes, designed to dazzle and confuse. But in his desire to create the perfect puzzle, he overlooked the simple human truths." He walked over to the window and looked down at the Thames, a grey ribbon winding its way through the heart of the city. The doctor's grief for his son was the engine of this crime, a powerful and terrible engine. It drove him to an act of monstrous cruelty, but it did not make him infallible. He forgot that others, too, are driven by their passions. He thought the love between Lady Beatrice and Mr. Finch was merely a convenient distraction he could manipulate for his timetable. He did not account for the fact that Lady Beatrice, in her own moment of emotional crisis, would do something illogical. She would go to her husband's room. Her action, born of a confused heart, was the one variable his cold logic could not predict. It was her truth that exposed the flaw in his. "And so the lovers, what will become of them?" I asked. Poirot sighed, a deep and profoundly sad sound. "Who can say? Their love was born in the shadows of a tyranny. Now that the tyrant is gone, will it flourish in the light, or will the memory of this day, the scandal and the sorrow, poison it? The human heart, mon ami, is a mystery far more complex than a locked room." He picked up his hat and cane from the chair where he had placed them. His movements were, as always, precise and neat, but they seemed slower now, as if he too felt the weight of the tragedy. "It is a sad business, Chief Inspector," Poirot said, turning to the door. "To nurse a grievance for so long, to let it fester until you turn you into that. It is the weight of a soul, Chief Inspector," Poirot said, turning to the door. "The doctor carried the weight of his dead son's soul for many years, and in the end it was a weight too heavy to bear. It crushed the good man he once was. Lord Harrington was a wicked man, it is true, but the Lord does not permit us to be our own executioners. For if we do, we create not order, but a far greater chaos." He paused at the door, his hand on the knob, and looked back at the opulent room. "This place, it is a palace of comfort and luxury, but it is not immune to the darkness of the human heart. No place is." With a final, decisive nod, he opened the door and stepped out into the corridor. I followed him, leaving Jap to the grim administrative tasks that are the epilogue of every murder investigation. We walked in silence through the grand lobby of the Savoy, a world that seemed entirely untouched by the drama that had unfolded on the fourth floor. The string quartet was playing a gentle valse, people were laughing over afternoon tea, and the life of the great hotel flowed on, oblivious. As we stepped out onto the Strand, the roar of London's traffic enveloped us. The city was a vast, chaotic, and indifferent machine. Poirot hailed a taxi, and as we settled into the back seat, I felt a sense of profound relief, as if I were returning to the sane and normal world. "Well, Poirot," I said, trying to lighten the mood, "I suppose you'll be glad of a little peace and quiet after all this." Hercule Poirot looked out of the taxi window at the endless stream of faces passing by on the pavement. His eyes were thoughtful. His expression, one I had come to know well. It was the look of a man who understood with a clarity that was a gift and a burden the intricate and often terrible patterns of human behavior. "The peace, Hastings," he said softly. "It is only temporary. For the serpent, he is always in the garden. Always."